All right, Georgia versus Tennessee. This is the video I make for all the sensitive people who don't like trash talking videos, so there won't be much trash talking in this video. And look, I can't help myself. I might drop a joke or two, but in general, this won't be a trash talking video, so you can put your Kleenex down for this one. Biggest game of the year so far this year in college football. Playoff rankings just came out. Tennessee #1, Georgia #3. Sanford Stadium Saturday, 3:30 p.m. SEC East. Matchup winner almost guaranteed a spot in the SEC title game. It would take a total collapse from the team that wins this game not to win the East. So, huge game. Also, a likely playoff elimination game. It's possible the loser of this game gets into the playoffs. It's more likely Tennessee were to get in with a loss than Georgia, but trust me, I've been in that situation before. You don't want to be sitting there on Selection Sunday with your fingers crossed praying that the selection committee puts you at 4 instead of 5. It's not a fun spot to be in. So for all intents and purposes, I'm looking at this as a playoff elimination game. It's a huge game, one of the biggest games in the history of Sanford Stadium. And like I said, probably the biggest game this year in all of college football. Well, definitely the biggest game in all of college football so far this year. The Michigan-Ohio State game has a chance to be huge at the end of the year if Michigan and Ohio State both win out, end up 11-0, and then play each other at the end. So we'll see. Most expensive regular season ticket on record in the history of college football this weekend, Sanford Stadium, 3:30. I'm going to give you some of my overall thoughts of the game, some key matchups, some things to watch. People like these keys to the game. I don't call them keys to the game. Things to watch for, like if these things are happening, probably a good indication one team or the other is going to win or lose. But before we do that, I'm just going to read off some stats. You guys can make your own minds up in the comment section what, if anything, this means in relationship to this game. Now, in case anybody tries to show up in the comment section and say some of these stats are wrong, every one of these stats right here came straight from NCAA.com today. So that's where I got them from. I'm not saying they're right or they're the gospel, but that's where they came from, NCAA.com as of today. Let's start with some of the simpler ones and some of the less surprising ones, right? Some things that even if you don't know these exact stats, you have a pretty good idea. Points per game scored on offense. No surprise, Tennessee is #1. You might be a little bit surprised to know that Georgia is 6 in the nation. I'm not talking about SEC here. So Tennessee, #1 nationally in offensive points per game, but Georgia sitting there at 6th nationally in offensive points per game. We'll stick with offense for a while. Total offense, again, no surprise, Tennessee, #1 in the country in total offense. That's yards per game. Georgia, #2. Again, something that may surprise some people, especially if you haven't been following Georgia all year. You might think Ohio State or Bama or fill in whatever blank team. Georgia, 6th in points scored per game nationally, 2nd in total offense. Tennessee, 1st in points per game, 1st in total offense. You want to break it down running and passing? This is something that I know for a fact surprises a lot of people when it comes to Tennessee. You watch Tennessee on SportsCenter, on College Football Final, on highlight shows, whatever, what do you see? You see Hendon Hooker dropping back and throwing 50-yard touchdown passes to Jalen Hyatt. And they do a lot of that. He's got, 15 touchdown passes this year? Would it surprise you if I told you that Tennessee runs the ball 60% of the time? Tennessee runs the ball percentage-wise more than Georgia. Georgia runs the ball about 48% of the time, throws it 52%. Tennessee runs the ball 60% of the time, throws it only 40% of the time. But when they throw it, they make it count. Let's look at the rush offenses. These are national rankings rush offense. Georgia has the 22nd best rush offense in the country. Tennessee has the 24th best rush offense in the country. And this is going to be one of the keys to the game, I think. Each team's ability to run the ball for different reasons, and I'll get to those reasons in a minute. Pass offense, no surprise. Tennessee is #2 in the country in pass offense. This is total passing yards per game. You might be surprised to know that Georgia is 8th. Georgia's 8th in the country in total passing yards per game. Tennessee, 2nd. So offensively so far, everything pretty close. Defense, we'll stick with the same sort of theme here. Defensive yards per game. I don't think you'll be surprised to know that Georgia is 2nd in the country in total defense. Total yards allowed per game. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. You might be surprised to know that Tennessee is 26th, though. You might have thought it was a little lower. There's a knock or sort of a reputation of Tennessee. Oh, their defense is horrible. We'll break it down a little bit here coming up. But overall, the 26th best team in the country in terms of defensive, total defense, yards given up per game. But that's points per game. I swear I wasn't trolling. I read it wrong. Tennessee is 26 in points per game. Georgia is second in points per game. So points given up. Georgia 2, Tennessee 26. I swear I'm not trolling. Look at all these notes I have written down, and it's a mess. They're in no particular order. They're just spread all over the page, so it was easy for me to read that wrong. Okay, let's try that again. Points allowed per game. Georgia's second, no surprise. You might be surprised to know, though, that Tennessee's 26. Not as bad as maybe you thought it would be, right? Total defense, UGA 4th, not a surprise. Tennessee 80th. Now, that is horrible. That's terrible. There's no sugarcoating it. There's no, you can't put lipstick on it. That's just horrible. To have the 80th total defense is not good, okay? It's just not good. Now, points per game is clearly a more important stat than total defense, right? Doesn't do you no good if you get a bunch of yards and can't score, right? So, it's better that Tennessee is 26th in points per game, right? That's better. But they're 80th in total yards, so they give up a ton of yards. You break that down running and passing, again, no surprise. When you look at pass defense, Tennessee's 127th out of 130 teams. Horrendous. Now, with that being said, they played their best game of the year all the way around, I think, last week against Kentucky. I think that was Tennessee's best game. They beat Bama, and that's great. That was a huge win for Tennessee. They beat Florida at home. That was a big win. They beat Pitt on the road. They beat what they did to LSU was impressive. To me, and I've watched almost every Tennessee game this year, the best game they've played was this past week at home against Tennessee. Held Will Levis under 100 yards passing. Kentucky only scored 6 points in that game. But for the year, Tennessee's 127th in pass defense. Georgia's 13th. Rush defense, a different story. Tennessee's 9th in the country in rush defense. So tough to run the ball on Tennessee. Georgia's 5th. None of these defensive numbers for Georgia are surprising to me. I think everybody knows Georgia's got a really good defense. Every defensive stat you look at is in the top 10 almost. Pass defense, they're 13th. But if you're wondering where Alabama is at as sort of a comparison, Alabama is 33rd in pass defense. So Georgia, a little bit better of a pass defense than Alabama. We'll see what that means for this game, but people like to compare kind of opponents that teams have played or whatever, so I did write that down. So the surprising things with those stats, I think some people will be surprised to know that Georgia's number 2 in the country in offensive yards per game, number 2 in total offense. I think that would surprise people. I think it would surprise people to know that Tennessee's defense is 26th in points allowed. I think most people would guess they were a lot worse than that. They're 26th in points allowed per defense and top 10 rush defense. I think those would be some surprising things to a lot of people about the Tennessee defense. Now, let's look at some more nuanced stats here. And some of these are in Tennessee's favor. So this isn't me cherry-picking stats. I went through basically every stat they had on NCAA.com. I'm not cherry-picking one way or the other. And you're about to see some of these stats lean heavily in Tennessee's direction. Let's start with one right here. Turnover margin. In any big game, whenever you hear anybody talk about a big game, at some point they always mention turnovers. Well, you can't turn the ball over. Can't give the other team extra possessions. Whoever commits turnovers is probably going to lose. That's true in almost every single college football game, right? So let's look at the turnover situation this year for Tennessee and Georgia. Tennessee's 11th nationally in turnover margin. That's really good. Really good. 11th nationally. Tennessee has caused 16 turnovers from the opposing offenses, right? So a combination of interceptions and recovered fumbles, Tennessee has caused 16 turnovers. Tennessee has given the ball away 8 times. So they've got twice as many takeaways as they do giveaways. That's good. That's really good. Of course, Hendon Hooker only has the 1 interception on the season. So Tennessee, 11th nationally, 16 takeaways, 8 giveaways. Georgia, 67th nationally in turnover margin. Not good. Georgia has only created 9 turnovers on the season, an average of about 1 per game, whereas Tennessee is creating an average of 2 per game, right? Georgia has created 9 turnovers and given it away 9 times, 1-to-1. Not great, not great at all. Early in the year, Georgia was doing well turnover margin wise. Last 4 or 5 weeks, the offense has turned the ball over more than they were in the beginning of the season. The defense has not been creating the turnovers that they were early in the season. So Georgia 67th in turnover margin, Tennessee 11th. Tennessee with a big advantage there so far on the season. And this is obviously something that could be huge in this game. especially for Georgia. When you're playing a team like Tennessee, it's hard enough to stop their offense under normal circumstances. The last thing you want to be doing if you're Georgia is giving Tennessee extra possessions, right? There's nothing more demoralizing for a defense to go out and have a really good series against a really good offense. Like, for example, Georgia, let's say at some point in the game, Georgia goes out and forces a 3-and-out. That is great for any defense to do against Tennessee. There's nothing more demoralizing, though, for the defense to go out and do that. Tennessee punts the ball away. Georgia comes out, and on the second play, they turn it over to Tennessee. There's nothing more demoralizing to a defense than that, right? Got to avoid that, I think, especially if you're UGA. You cannot give Tennessee extra possession. So Georgia's going to have to do something to turn this stat around in this particular game, I think. Let's look at third down conversions. Third down, the money down, a very important down in college football. Again, I think something that's very important for Georgia in this game, and Tennessee to an extent as well. It's hard to stop the Tennessee offense. I'm stating the obvious here. So when you get them in a third down, you got to win. You've got to win those third downs more than you don't. Georgia's got to force Tennessee to under 50% third down conversions in this game. Especially when you get Tennessee in third and longs, 3rd and 6 or more, you have got to get off the field in those situations. Whether it be sacks, whether it be chasing Hendon Hooker around and forcing him to throw it away, whether it be incomplete pass, whatever you have to do, you have got to get Tennessee off the field when you get them in third downs. If at the end of this game I look down and Tennessee converted 60 or 65% of their third downs, I'm going to tell you I'm pretty sure Tennessee won the game then. So what are the third down numbers for these teams this year? Well, offensively, Georgia is converting 52% of the time on third down. So for the season, over half the time, Georgia is converting those third downs. Tennessee, on the other hand, 50%. So very close here. Very close. Georgia is 6th nationally in third down conversion rate at 52% on offense. Tennessee is 12th nationally at 50%. So almost identical there. Defensively, Georgia is 10th nationally. Georgia only allows the opponent to convert third downs 28% of the time. Tennessee allows their opponents to convert on third down 31% of the time. So again, not much difference there between the two, really, in terms of third down conversion rates offensively and defensively. You're talking about 2% difference offensively in Georgia's favor and 3% defensively in Georgia's favor. So which team can get off the field on third down? Now, the reason this is important for Georgia on offense, Georgia has to sustain drives here. We're going to talk about time of possession and the number of plays that these two teams run per game in a minute. And I think you'll be surprised at some of those numbers too. Georgia offensively has got to sustain drives. The reason I think there's kind of a perception out there that the whole Georgia ain't got no offense line that you kind of hear sometimes, clearly the numbers don't back that up. 2nd nationally in total yards, 6th nationally in points per game. The numbers don't back that up. Clearly Georgia has a really good offense. So why is it that there's kind of this perception out there that maybe they don't? Well, we talked earlier about when you watch Tennessee on the highlight shows, what do you see? You see 40, 50, 60-yard bombs to Jalen Hyatt, right? You don't see that with Georgia. You see it on occasion. Brock Bowers had a circus catch against Florida this past week on a terrible pass by Stetson Bennett that should have been intercepted. Wasn't. Brock Bowers made a circus catch and takes off for a huge 60, 70-yard touchdown, whatever it was. So you see those on occasion. But generally speaking, Georgia drives are slow and methodical, right? They're not hurrying up to the line and running plays as fast as they can. They're not chucking the ball 40 and 50 yards downfield multiple times per quarter. They just don't do that. They grind things out. They lean on you. They run the ball. Now, Tennessee runs the ball too. Let's not forget about that. But when you watch Tennessee play, right, most of their offensive possessions are 1 to 2 minutes long. And they either score quick in a minute or they're punting the ball back to you quick in a minute, right? It's one of the two. You rarely see a 4 or 5 minute drive for Tennessee. Not that they can't do it. They can run the ball, but they strike quick. They strike quick. Georgia, in order to rest its defense in this game, offensively has got to have 4, 5, 6 minute drives in this game, I think. And converting third downs is going to be key to doing that, right? If you're a Georgia fan, what you want to see in this game is 1st and 10, 2nd and 5, 3rd and 2. Pick that up. 1st and 10 again. 2nd and 5. 3rd and 2. pick that up. 1st and 10, 2nd and 5, 3rd and 2. That would be ideal to me. Slow, methodical, successful marches down the field. And then on occasion, of course, you're going to have to let Stetson drop back and take a deep shot to force Tennessee to respect the passing game and not just put 8, 9 people in the box on every play or whatever. But that does a couple of different things. Number one, it keeps Tennessee's offense off the field, right? Tennessee's offense can't score if they're not on the field. More importantly, almost than that, though, it's resting the Georgia defense. And we all know why that's important when you play Tennessee. Because they're going to try to run plays as fast as humanly possible. And there's not very many teams in the country better at running plays quickly than Tennessee. With that being said, I want to talk about the plays per game that each team runs. And this is something that I think, again, might surprise people. Tennessee is... They run 75 plays per game on average. 75 plays. Again, think about what you know about Tennessee. They run a play. They get tackled. They jump up as quick as they can. They run back to the line. They're snapping the ball again a lot of times within 5-6 seconds. 10, 15 at the longest. And they're ready and they're going again. Quick, right? They run 75 plays a game. What do you know about Georgia's offense? Well, they don't run a huddle. I mean, no one runs a huddle, but they don't run a hurry-up offense either. Georgia runs a play, they get tackled, they mosey on back to the line, the players line up, they look over to the sideline, the play gets called in, Stetson Bennett walks up, talks to the offensive line, walks back into the shotgun, looks out at the wide receivers, moves them or motions them around, whatever he needs to do, snaps the ball with, 5 seconds left on the play clock on average, right? Tennessee runs really quick. Georgia, in no hurry at all. Tennessee runs 75 plays a game. How many plays a game do you think Georgia runs? 74. 74. How's that possible? How's that possible? Great question. Glad you asked. You might already know. Georgia's defense is way better than Tennessee's. Again, this isn't a trash talking video. Tennessee's offense is better than Georgia's. Georgia's defense is better than Tennessee's, okay? Georgia's defense is getting the ball back for their offense, generally speaking, much quicker than Tennessee's defense is getting the ball back for their offense, right? So it's giving Georgia extra possessions. So even though Georgia appears to be operating at a snail's pace and Tennessee appears to be operating at a lightning quick pace, How is it that they run basically the same number of plays per game? Tennessee runs an average of 75 plays per game. Georgia runs an average of 74. It's because of the two defenses. The average time of possession that a team's offense is on the field in a drive against Tennessee is much longer than the average time that a team's offense is on the field in a given drive against Georgia. Because Georgia's defense is just better and, generally speaking, over the course of the year has gotten off the field quicker than Tennessee's defense. That's it. It doesn't mean anything more than that or anything less than that. It's just interesting to me, considering how fast Tennessee plays and how slow Georgia plays, that they run basically the same number of plays per game, and it's because of how good or not good the two defenses are respectively. Again, Tennessee is great against the run, so I'm not taking anything against Tennessee defensively against the run. Everyone knows they're horrible against the pass. Tennessee fans know, right? It hasn't mattered. So, there's really no need to even argue that with me. You know your pass defense is no good. Hasn't mattered because you're scoring 50 points a game, right? But that's why a team like Georgia and Tennessee, who have two totally different offensive styles, are running basically the same number of plays per game. Georgia's defense is getting the ball back for the offense on average a lot quicker than Tennessee's defense is. Here's another thing that you always hear as a key to a game that leans heavily in Tennessee's favor here. When you're playing a passing team or a team that can really hurt you by throwing the ball, like Tennessee, what do you always hear people say? Well, he got to sack Hendon Hooker. He can't complete a pass if he's laying on his back. I agree. Problem is, Georgia can't sack the quarterback. We're one of the worst teams in the country at sacking the quarterback. Just a fact. I think Georgia's got a great defense. I think Tennessee's got a great offense. Georgia's defense ain't perfect. Tennessee's offense ain't perfect. You can find some things wrong with Tennessee's offense. You can find some things wrong with Georgia's defense, and one of them is sacks. Georgia's 120th. There's only 130 teams. Georgia's 120th in the country when it comes to sacking the QB. Georgia has a grand total of 10 sacks all year in 8 games. That's barely over 1 sack a game. Last week against Florida, we didn't sack Anthony Richardson the entire game until like the last 2 minutes. So that's where 3 of those sacks came from. We only had 7 sacks heading into the Florida game. Got 3 against Florida, but they were all in garbage time at the end when Florida was down by over 3 touchdowns. You knew they were dropping back and passing. It was a give-up mode situation, and we were able to get to Anthony Richardson at the end when Florida was running long fly routes that took forever to develop. But Georgia has not been good at sacking the QB. Tennessee, on the other hand, 21st in the country. 35th in the country with 21 sacks. So Georgia's only got 10 sacks this year. Tennessee's got 21. Way better at getting to the QB this year. Tennessee has been than UGA. What about sacks allowed, though, right? Because you could be great at sacking the quarterback, but what if you play a team that doesn't give up any sacks? What happens then? Or if you're Georgia and you're terrible at sacking the QB, what if you play a team that can't protect their QB? Well, let's find out if that's the case here. Sacks allowed. Tennessee is 41st in the country. They've allowed 13 sacks. That's not bad. 41st might sound like a high number, but they've only allowed 13 sacks. Again, what is that? Barely over 1.5 sacks per game they're giving up. Georgia, on the other hand, only allowed 7 sacks. They're 7th in the country. Georgia's allowing less than 1 sack per game. So Tennessee's better at getting to the quarterback. Georgia's better at protecting the quarterback. Who wins that battle? It's my prediction that Georgia doesn't get any sacks at all on Hendon Hooker. Now, if you've watched Georgia games this year, while it's true they have a hard time sacking the QB and getting them on the ground, they don't have a hard time or haven't had a hard time in the majority of their games pressuring QBs. A lot of QBs in college football these days are mobile, right? More teams than not have mobile QBs. Teams that have played Georgia, their quarterbacks have spent the majority of the game running around, scrambling out, getting flushed out of the pocket. Georgia has not had a problem getting pressure on QBs. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case again this Saturday. I just told you I don't think Georgia's going to get any sacks against Hendon Hooker. I do think they will get some pressure on him, and sometimes that can be almost just as effective as a sack, right? If you can move a QB off his spot, if you can force him to scramble out, throw on the run, maybe that affects his accuracy. Maybe we force Hendon Hooker to make, maybe Hendon Hooker ends up with 5 or 6 incomplete passes in this game because he's sort of running for his life. Not that we'll sack him, but that's sort of like best case scenario you can hope for if you're a Georgia fan, because we just can't sack the QB. Tennessee, on the other hand, another interesting matchup, been good sacking the QB this year, right? They've got 21 sacks, but Georgia, one of the best teams in the country at protecting their QB. So can Tennessee get to Stetson? I don't know. I think it's going to be hard for either team to sack the QB in this game. Tennessee is better at sacking the opposing QB than Georgia, no question. But Georgia appears to be much better at protecting the QB than Tennessee. So we'll see how that thing sort of works itself out. Here's one that tilts heavily in Georgia's favor. What about penalties? Tennessee's one of the most penalized teams in America. This kind of shocked me. Georgia is 4th in the country. Very disciplined team. Georgia's only committed 32 penalties all season long. That's 4th in the country. Tennessee, on the other hand, is 119th in the country in penalties committed. They've committed 67. So they've committed over twice as many penalties this year as UGA. So what does that mean for this game? Well, if the law of averages holds true, you can expect something like 8, 9, or 10 penalties for Tennessee, 4, 5, 6 penalties for Georgia, if the averages hold true. That's going to equate to, overall, an extra first down or 2 for UGA offensively, and probably a negated first down or 2 for Tennessee over the course of a game. That's what those numbers would bear out, right? So we'll see what happens there. Did I write down anything else that's pointless and doesn't matter? No, there you go. I think that's most of the stats I wrote. And I know that's boring, and that's why I don't typically do these types of videos, but a lot of people cry with the trash talking. So again, I'm just reading the stats off to you. Y'all can decide in the comments for yourselves what you think those stats mean. What do I think about the game? What do I think is going to happen? I think whoever runs the ball better is going to win the game. That might sound boring to say, but more times than not in college football, that's what happens. And in this game, Tennessee, if you go percentage-wise, Tennessee's a running team. They run the ball 60% of the time. This is going to be the best rush defense Tennessee's played all year. We'll see how they handle it. A key number, I think, that each team will be looking for, 160, 170. I think if any team gets 160, 170 yards rushing or more, it's likely that team wins the game. If a team goes over 200, it's almost a guarantee that team wins the game. Why is that so important in a game that could be up into the 40s scoring-wise, so you're thinking like a shootout? First downs extend drives, and running plays extend drives. You know, it's great to go out and score a 50-yard touchdown pass. That's amazing, right? But then the other team's got the ball back right away, and they've got a chance to match it. You run the ball down the field at 3 and 4 yards a pop for 5 or 6 minutes, that's demoralizing for a defense. So which offensive line wins the line of scrimmage battle in this game in terms of the running game? I talked about the sack situation, and that obviously involves the offensive lines as well. But with each team's running game, these teams are averaging about 200 yards a game rushing. Georgia's averaging a little bit more per game than Tennessee. We talked about the rushing numbers earlier. Georgia's the 22nd best rushing team in the country. Tennessee, 24th best. So the numbers are very, very close. Which one of these two teams is more successful running the ball, right? We'll see. I think Georgia will be able to run the ball on Tennessee. We'll see if Georgia's able to run the ball on, if Tennessee's able to run the ball on Georgia. Very few teams, not just last year. You go back 3, 4, 5 years, really back to 2017. Georgia's had one of the best rush defenses in college football for 4 or 5 years in a row now, 6 years in a row now. Very few teams have ran the ball successfully on UGA in that amount of time. So we'll see. As a Georgia fan, I am relying heavily on our defensive front to try to slow down Tennessee's run game. I do not think you're going to eliminate completely Tennessee's big playability through the air. I completely expect Tennessee to hit a couple of big ones in this game at a minimum. The difference between winning and losing this game for Georgia, in my mind, is does Tennessee hit a couple of big plays, or is this an Alabama situation where they hit 4 or 5, right? If Tennessee hits 4 or 5 40, 50-yard touchdown passes, they're going to win this game. So what, you want to call that a key to the game? Okay. If Tennessee hits 4 or 5 long bombs, they're going to win this game. If Tennessee is forcing Georgia early in this game to change the game plan around, Georgia's not built to play from behind. I don't care what you think about Stetson Bennett. You can think Stetson Bennett's the greatest thing since Buck Bellew, and a lot of idiot Georgia fans do for whatever reason. I think Buck Bellew and Stetson Bennett are the 2 best quarterbacks we've ever had because they happen to have title rings. Anyway, I'm not getting into that. This Georgia offense is not built to come from behind. If I look up at the end of the first quarter and the score is something like 21-6, Tennessee's on top, 21-10, something like that, chances are Georgia's not coming back from that. If Tennessee's just going up and down the field in the first quarter, and I look up 21-10, 21-6, something like that, and Georgia's bogging down, it's probably over. Because Georgia's going to abandon the run game. They're going to let Stetson Bennett throw it 50-something times, and that's probably just not going to work. You got to slow Tennessee down. And it starts with the running game for Georgia, both offensively and on defense, slowing down the Tennessee running game as well. As good as Hendon Hooker in that passing game is, no passing game is at its best when the defense knows they have to pass, right? That's one of the ways Tennessee is so successful at throwing the ball, because they run the ball so well. Teams can't just play 7 DBs against Tennessee. If you do, Tennessee's just going to run it down your throat for 4 quarters. They're capable of doing that. You put 7 DBs in the game. So you can't do that. You got to play a traditional defense against Tennessee, at least in terms of alignment. Maybe you can play some nickel. But Tennessee will run the ball on you. So Georgia's got to slow down that running game, get Tennessee in obvious passing situations where it becomes harder for Hendon Hooker to hit those wide receivers downfield. I think it's a huge key to the game. Turnovers, I already mentioned, huge key. Georgia cannot afford to give Tennessee extra possessions in this game. You just can't do it. As good as Georgia is, and Georgia's extremely talented, they're more talented than Tennessee top to bottom, but the more talented team doesn't always win the game. The more talented team's going to win more times than not, but it doesn't always happen. And if Georgia doesn't figure out a way to limit the big plays by Tennessee to 1 or 2, if Georgia can't figure out a way to slow down Tennessee's run game, and if Georgia turns the ball over offensively and gives Tennessee extra possessions, they're going to lose this game. Tennessee's going to lose this game if some of the same things happen, but in reverse. If Georgia is able to run the ball for 4.5 yards a carry in this game, they will win. Period. If I look up at the end of the game, you don't need to show me any other stat. If Georgia rushed for 4.5 yards per carry, they will have won this game. If Stetson Bennett has thrown the ball less than 35 times, we won the game. If Georgia doesn't commit any turnovers, probably wins the game, right? Home field advantage is something I hadn't talked about. There's been some debate about that this week. How big of a home field advantage is there in Sanford Stadium? It's a big home field advantage. I know Tennessee fans checked out of college football about 20 years ago, but playing in Sanford Stadium today is not like playing in Sanford Stadium 20 years ago. So there is going to be a significant home field advantage crowd-wise for Georgia. And even if you're not a believer in the Sanford Stadium home environment, you know what you're definitely not getting in this game? You're not getting the Neyland Stadium home environment. So even if the Sanford Stadium, Georgia home environment doesn't affect Tennessee's offense at all, you're still losing the advantage you have at Neyland by affecting the other team's offense. So either way, it's a benefit and advantage for UGA to be playing this game in Athens. We can't run around talking about how important home field advantage is in college football, and then when a game comes up where you don't have home field advantage, you suddenly try to downplay it. Doesn't work that way. Can't do that. Not going to happen. Mismatches in this game, obviously Tennessee's receivers versus some of the younger Georgia DBs, right? Kamari Lassiter, first-year starter at one of the corner spots. Malachi Starks is a true freshman safety. They're going to have to play well. I like Keely Ringo. I'm okay with him with the one corner. Christopher Smith might be the best DB on our team. The other safety, I've got next to no worries about them. Malachi Starks, though, true freshman. Freshmen make freshman mistakes, right? And Kamari Lassiter on the other side, with him being a first-year starter, curious to see how he handles the situation, too. So some possible mismatches there. And Josh Heupel's great at this. You watch Tennessee play Alabama, and you wonder, how in the hell can Jalen Hyatt be that wide open 4, 5, 6 times a game, 40 yards downfield? It's not just busted coverages. It's not happening by accident. Josh Heupel is a genius at moving Jalen Hyatt and the other pieces around to create mismatches on certain defensive players in your secondary. It's not happening by accident. And he's going to try to do it again. Mismatches in Georgia's favor, the tight ends. Georgia's tight ends are a mismatch against every team they play. I think it's going to be particularly a mismatch for Tennessee in this game. If you go back and look at the stats or watch the Tennessee games from this year, Tennessee's had a hard time defending tight ends in general this year. Not a good sign when you're getting ready to play Georgia, who arguably has 2 of the best 4 or 5 tight ends in the country. They've got the best tight end in the country in Brock Bowers. You can make the argument Darnell Washington is also a top 5 tight end. I love the guy at Notre Dame. There's a handful of that you can name that are amazing. Darnell Washington is top 5. He's a problem. He's 6'8", 250 pounds. I mean, he's the same height and weight as LeBron James. He's a problem. He's a problem. Brock Bowers gets a lot of attention, but Darnell Washington's a problem. Will we let Eric Gilbert out of his cage this week? I don't know. Have no idea. Eric Gilbert's probably the most talented pass catcher on our team. The guy can't get on the field. So, I don't know. Alabama learned a valuable lesson when they played Tennessee. Don't keep your best players on the sideline, right? For whatever reason, Eli Ricks couldn't get on the field against Tennessee. The very next week, he was the best player on Alabama's team, but he didn't play one snap against Tennessee. Discipline issues, whatever. I get it. I want to win games. I don't know what's going on with Eric Gilbert, and I wish him nothing but the best. But he might be the most talented pass catcher on this team. It sure would be nice if we let him play sometime other than the fourth quarter against Vandy when we're up by 50 points. But what do I know? Almost nothing. Anyway, there you go. There's a very long, ridiculous, extended, non-trash talking version of what I think about this game. Some keys to the game, what I think what I think each team needs to try to do, what I think each team needs to try to avoid. Some key stats that I think if certain teams hit this or that number, probably win the game. What do I think's going to happen? Oh, one other interesting stat for you degenerate gamblers out there. Depending on which sports book you look at, whether it's an online book or a Vegas book, or a lot of people like to look at MGM or Caesars or whatever. Whichever one you look at, between 80 and 90% of the bets made so far on this game is on Tennessee. That is a huge number. A huge number. So far, as of right now, it's the most lopsided game this season in terms of fans betting on one particular team. At every single sports book, between 80 and 90% of the bets made have gone on Tennessee. The current line right now is Georgia minus 7.5, I believe, or 7.5 or 8.5, depending on where you look, between 7.5 and 8.5. Do you know anything at all about gambling? 80 to 90% of the money on Tennessee. You ever heard the phrase fade to public? There's never been a bigger fade to public play than this one. I don't live in Vegas, but I know for a fact they're not tearing down casinos to build smaller ones. No. Every time you turn around, they're building a bigger one. Why? Because they're raking money in. Why are they raking money in? Well, because 80 or 90% of the people walking around are fucking morons.